Now, look, I have to ask, I think, next week for slight change in time. Let me see why. I made a note here to ask you. Oh, yes. Would you mind terribly if we tried to rearrange next week?
No, that's fine.
Amazingly, there's an opera on.
Oh, that's lovely.
And is it something quite it's only for members of Glyndebourne, and we have tickets for Glyndebourne this year, and they're giving us a special performance. I thought it would be rather fun to do, even though it's not a legitimate reason for asking for a change.
No, it's fine. I don't mind.
In these times, I think it's something to look forward to, at least for me. So next week, when can you manage? I could manage earlier in the day.
What kind of time? I can do until 12:45 or before 11:15.
And then not after that, because you're busy in the afternoon.
No, I can do after 12:45.
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. We could do 2 to 3 or 3 to 4.
Yeah.
Would you prefer?
3 to.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. I tell a lie. I have a seminar.
Okay, don't worry.
It's 1:30 to 3. That's why I couldn't fit it in. I could fit it in from 3:30 to 4:30.
Yeah. Are you sure? Because that's only 10 minutes different. Is that okay?
Yeah. My workshop is over at 3, so I can have a cup of tea, and then 3:30 to 4:30. Yes.
Okay,
So it's
cool.
hardly any different. Good. I don't have to feel guilty. Okay. Good. And then we go back to our and then the next week.
Yeah, let me just write this down.
Oh, the next week I do the same thing. That fits. Yeah. Yep.
So the next week, is it back to 3:40 or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that works. Okay. All right. So I've got your essay. How did you find thinking about this?
I liked kind of going deeper into intentionality and doing a slightly different question. Yeah, I liked doing it. I didn't like one of the readings.
Which one?
The Horgan and Tiensen.
Okay, what didn't you like?
I just found it quite difficult to understand.
That's fair enough. It's a very, very hard essay. But the reason I put it there is that it helps you to get the sense of what they call separatism.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted you to get from that. Don't worry about the rest of it. It is maybe by the end you can go back and read it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think right now it is too hard. Okay?
Yeah.
It's just there isn't a whole lot that isn't very hard on this topic, and I wanted us to have a go. So that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, read to me.
Okay. Was Brentano right to say that all mental states exhibit intentionality? Intentionality can be understood most simply as directedness on something. Thus, to say of an individual's mental states that they have intentionality is to say that they have direction upon an object. According to Brentano, all and only mental states exhibit intentionality. This essay aims to deliberate whether he was right to claim that mentality is sufficient for intentionality. It will begin with a short description of Brentano's thesis, followed by a discussion of various positions that either support or deny the claim that all mental states exhibit intentionality. Ultimately, it will be found that the most plausible account is non-reductive intentionalism, which holds that all mental states are intentional, but that they also have phenomenal characters which are not defined by the intentional nature of the state.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, I'm just looking at that. Let me have a think.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just clarify for me? I know where you're going. You want to account for non-reductive intentionalism.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just tell me what you take reductive intentionalism to be by contrast?
Yes, I talk about it later on. I think I take
I just want to know for now. Yeah.
reductive intentionalism to be that the intentional nature of the state exhausts its character, and that I think the phenomenal character of the mental state supervenes. The phenomenal character of the mental state supervenes on its intentional character.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Let's go on and see.
It can be said that Franz Brentano, more than any other philosopher, is responsible for keeping the term intentional alive in philosophical discussions for the last century and a half. For Brentano, what seems to be crucial is that we can define mental phenomena by saying that they are intentional in a way that we cannot define physical phenomena. In this way, intentionality is the mark of the mental, and so the central and defining characteristic of thoughts is that they have objects. For it to be the case that intentionalism is the mark of the mental, it appears Brentano must commit himself to the view that all and only mental phenomena exhibit intentionality, that mentality is both sufficient and necessary for intentionality. However, this...
Wait. That intentionality is both sufficient and necessary for mentality, isn't it? I could go that way. I'm just thinking. Is that right? I always get this a little confused. So
I think one's meant to go mental.
Isn't it that he's saying that intentionality is necessary for mentality? Mentality is necessary for intention. Which is the fundamental one? All and only mental phenomena exhibit intentionality.
So, I think I was thinking for all mental phenomena to exhibit intentionality, that means mentality is... I'm getting it confused now as well. Mentality...
Intentionality is necessary for mentality. In other words, nothing is mental unless it has intentionality. Nothing has intentionality unless it's mental. I suppose it goes both ways around, but I think it's better to write it intentionality. I'm just thinking about the sufficiency. So intentionality is necessary for mentality, and it's sufficient for mentality. It's that way around, isn't it?
I think in Crane I read it this way around, but the way you're saying it sounds...
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I think if one is necessary and sufficient for the other, then it's a biconditional, isn't it? And if it's a biconditional, right, it says intentionality mentality if and only if intentionality. But what I'm trying to figure out is why it doesn't sound right to say intentionality if and only if mentality. Although, strictly speaking, I think it's true. Because if it's a biconditional, it goes in both directions.
Mentality if and only intentionality.
Do you have the Crane there?
I don't. I've moved to my boyfriend's house and I haven't brought the book with me.
It looked like a different place that you...
yeah, it's different.
I just thought you were in a different room.
I guess I could, I could have written it the other way around.
Yeah.
I think it took me a while, actually, this bit of the book. I was reading it again and again to get the sufficiency and necessary, like the sufficient and necessary. And it did make sense, but now I'm second-guessing myself.
As I said, if it is an if and only if claim, if it's necessary and sufficient, it should go in both directions. So what you're saying should be true. It just doesn't sound as true as the other way around to me.
Mentality is sufficient for intentionality. So that's the...
But it's not intentional. Look, we want to know what's necessary for mentality, not what's necessary for intentionality.
Yes. You know, you're right.
Right? Although, strictly speaking, I think it's correct that mentality is necessary for intentionality because it goes both ways. But isn't it an odd thing to put it like that? Because it's the mental that we're really interested in. And that's what we're saying has this characteristic of intentionality. Not that we came up with intentionality and now we want to find something that fits it.
Yeah.
Okay? That's all I'm saying. So, good. It'd be interesting to see if Crane wrote it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just check it, okay?
Okay, I will. However, this first claim is contentious.
The first one being what?
The first one being it's sufficient, so...
Sufficiency.
Yeah,
yep.
All mental phenomena. Many philosophers argue that it is simply not the case that all mental states exhibit intentionality. The term mental states can be taken to encompass a wide range of mental phenomena, including thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptual experiences. It is relatively uncontentious that thoughts have objects, something they are about, and are therefore intentional. However, the question of whether other mental states are directed upon an object is disputed, and it is to a discussion of the nature of these other mental states we now turn to.
Yeah.
Some scholars believe that the phenomenological aspects and the intentional aspects of mentality are independent of one another. Mental states with a phenomenal character are such that there is something it is like to be in them. Common examples of mental states for which there is something it is like to have them are sensations such as pains and itches and colour sensations. Those who subscribe to the view that phenomenological and intentional aspects of mentality are independent argue that the phenomenal character of these states is not intentional. Additionally, they believe that the intentionality of certain mental states is not phenomenal. Beliefs and desires are intentional states. They are directed upon something, but they are not inherently phenomenal. This view is known as separatism, as it treats phenomenological aspects, I find that word very difficult to say, phenomenological aspects of mentality and intentional aspects of mentality as mutually independent and thus separable. According to separatists, then, it does not seem to be the case that all mental states exhibit intentionality, because if phenomenological and intentional aspects of mental states are separable, it follows that there can be mental states with a purely phenomenological character, which is not intentional.
Okay. So what they're objecting to, sorry, I'm remembering the tutorial I had this morning and we got a bit caught up, and I think that they didn't understand this. So basically, what Horgan and Teenson are saying is that what separatists get wrong is they don't appreciate that the intentional supervenes on the phenomenological. And that's the bit you found difficult.
The intention.
Because do you understand what supervenience is?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. So if something supervenes on something else, if A supervenes on B, there can't be changes in A without a change in B.
Good. All right, let me explain where that idea comes from, because it's going to come up again later, so we may as well go over it. It actually comes from aesthetics, even though, and it was picked up by Davidson in Philosophy of Mind. So I think it was first used in aesthetics and then used in moral philosophy and then used in philosophy of mind. So the idea is supposed to be this. Let's say I walk into an art gallery and I see a beautiful work of art. I look at that and I say, that is beautiful. And then someone brings in another canvas, which is precisely and exactly the same. And I say, no, that's not beautiful. That doesn't make sense. Okay? There's a sense in which, if the first one was beautiful, and if the second one really was absolutely the same, then that one must be beautiful. Now, it gets a little complicated because people might say when it comes to aesthetics, but one was by Picasso and the other wasn't. Right? If it's by Picasso, it's beautiful, but if it's, I can see it's a forgery. But then the argument's got to be, but there's got to be some difference here. Now, if being by Picasso is a difference that matters, let's build that in. So let's say they were both by Picasso. And then you say, but he did one in his blue period and one in his pink period. And we say, no, they were both in the blue period. And then you say one was in the morning and one was in the afternoon. And then you say, yes, but that's not a relevant difference, okay? So once we get down to all the relevant differences, then if we get all the relevant independent differences stacked up again, then it also must be beautiful. Okay?
Okay.
So what Horgan and Teenston are going to want to argue is you can't be separatists as much as the separatists want to be separatists. There is some correlation here between the phenomenal and the intentional.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So sorry, let me just get it into my head. So you said the intentional supervenes on the phenomenological.
I believe that's the way they want it to go. So that means that there can be no change in the phenomenological, which is also not a change in the intentional.
Okay. And then I just don't see quite how that fits into the canvas. I just don't quite get it. So the phenomenal is the what it's like of those two pictures.
No, forget about
okay.
No, I'm not. No,
that's just an example of where it comes from.
Was an example of the supervenience relation.
Okay, no. Then,
right?
Okay.
You said supervenience was between A's and B's.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving you another A and another B.
Okay. All right, I get it now.
Okay. Right. That wasn't meant to be an example of the phenomenological and the intentional.
So there can't be a difference in what it is like without there being a difference in what it is directed on.
That's their claim.
Okay.
Okay, that's their claim. How they established it is another matter, but that's the claim. Just like you can't have two pictures that are exactly the same in all relevant respects, and one is beautiful and the other isn't. The reason I give you that example is to get you going on the idea of supervenience.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right? And somebody says, oh, yes, but there is a physical difference. Look, over here he did this, and over there he did that. Then you say, okay, fine, now I can say that one's not beautiful and this one is.
Mm-hmm.
But without that, it doesn't make any sense that you'd say this one's beautiful, right, is the claim.
Okay.
And in fact, more people would actually go so far as to say the very property of being beautiful, if you want to put it like that, right, goes along with, as soon as you've got these properties, the property of beauty just pops up. Okay, and that's what they're going to be saying about the relation between the phenomenal and the intentional. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Carry on.
The view of separatists that phenomenological and intentional aspects of mental states are mutually independent can be refuted by reference to an argument by Horgan and Tientsen, which claims that mental states of the sort commonly cited as paradigmatically phenomenal, such as colour experiences, have an intentional character that is inseparable from their phenomenal character. Yeah. Okay.
Inseparable in the sense of supervenes upon.
Okay, I understand now. They call this the intentionality of phenomenology. In seeing a red pen on a nearby table, with a red chair behind the table, there is certainly something it is like to see red. But as well as this, the red that you see is a property of objects. These objects are seen as located in space relative to you and your visual awareness, and the objects are experienced as part of a three-dimensional scene. This spatial character is built into the phenomenology of the experience and helps you to make up your visual experience. Thus, when experiencing red, the overall phenomenal character of one's visual experience is a structurally rich what it is like of experiencing a visually presented scene. The visual experience is richly phenomenal because there is an overall what it is like of experiencing the whole scene. At the same time, the total visual experience is richly intentional, as it presents a temporally extended scene comprising various objects that instantiate various properties and relations at various spatial locations relative to one's centre of visual awareness.
Good, okay.
Thus, it can be argued that mental states which superficially seem to have only phenomenal qualities may also have intentional aspects.
Could you go back and check? It's, as I said, I haven't actually read the Horgan and Tientsen for a bit, but what the student this morning, Owen said was that the intentional supervenes on the phenomenal. He didn't have it as clearly stated as you, but that's how he stated the conclusion. In fact, I think he read it out to us from the article. So do check that. I know it's a supervenience relationship. Let's make sure we got it the right way round, because I'll come back and think about this for a minute. Which way round it looks like, what's supervening on what?
They have... There's the intentionality of phenomenology, and then there's the phenomenology of intentionality. So
okay, good.
He might be talking about that bit more.
I see. So they're saying it goes in both directions.
Yes, that is what they say. I just thought that this bit was more relevant to what I was saying. Okay, I'm getting it. All right, carry on. However, for some intentionalists, it is not enough to say that mental states have both phenomenal and intentional aspects. For them, intentionality exhausts the qualitative character of mental states. However, this seems problematic in many cases of mental states, for example, pain. Even if there is some place in the body that can be focused on and said to be where the pain is, it seems that the direction upon the object does not exhaust the qualitative character of pain. These intentionalists want to make a reductive claim that there is only direction upon an object, but it appears pain is an example of a state in which there is both direction upon an object and a qualitative feel. As Nagel puts it, there is something it is like to have that pain. Thus, it seems that intentionalism, which says that all there is to say about mental states is that they're directed upon something, can be rejected.
Let's get the whole essay out and then I'll come back. Okay.
For other intentionalists, intentionality defines the qualitative character of mental states, but does not exhaust them. Crane uses the term intentionalism for the general thesis that the nature of a conscious mental state is determined by its intentionality.
I have to stop you. Okay, so let's go back.
Mm-hmm.
So, for some I'm going back to the previous paragraph. For some intentionalists, the claim is that intentionality exhausts the qualitative character. And then you say, but you don't think that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Then you say, for other intentionalists, intentionality defines the qualitative character but doesn't exhaust them. I'm not sure I understand the distinction between defines and exhausts now.
Okay. So, in the second Crane that you gave us this week, he was saying that mental states do have a phenomenal character, but that phenomenal character is supervenes on its intentional character. So it does have phenomenal characteristics, but these are determined by the intentional character of the state. So I guess that's the difference, is that if I was thinking of the intentionality we were talking about last week and having that as the kind of sole property of mental states, that would be exhausting the character, whereas this new way of thinking about it that I read about this week was saying that it doesn't exhaust the character, but it does define the character.
I'm still a little bit bothered by this define, because to me, my first impression of define is that it exhausts it. If I define a word, I exhaustively define it, right? A bachelor is an unmarried male. What more is there to say? I've defined it, and I've exhausted it. So I find the term defines as opposed to exhausts, and is that actually how he puts it?
I don't know for sure that he says defined. I know he says determined. Maybe I should have used that instead.
Determined is also different.
Okay, so that's what I meant.
One thing can determine
No, it's funny. It's words that I use all the time, and it's only in philosophy that you really go into
what they
mean. Yeah.
Exactly. Philosophers are very. I'm constantly getting annoyed with people for using words. I mean, I'm not like students, but I mean, in ordinary life, and I have to pull myself back because being a philosopher is so natural to me. It's only as I've gotten older that I've realized that part of my problem in relating to other people is that I think everybody sees the world as I do because it's so obvious to me, and they don't.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's a kind of. I think it's like people say of mathematicians that they almost see the world in numbers, and I've always thought that's a bit weird. Or musicians, like they hear things that I don't hear. Well, I never thought philosophy was a way of seeing things and hearing things, but it is.
Yeah,
right?
definitely is.
And I've only just come to realize that very late in my life, but it's interesting. Okay, so that's why sometimes I have to kind of ask you where you're coming from, because I'm thinking, well, why do you even say that, right? And yet when you tell me, I say, oh, that's why you say it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So Crane uses the term intentionalism for the general thesis that the nature of a conscious mental state is determined by its intentionality. He believes that the conscious character of a state of mind is determined by its entire intentional nature. Intentionality is directedness on an object, but there are three dimensions in the ways one's state of mind might be directed upon an object. They may differ in their object, in their content, and in their mode. A difference in intentional mode refers to the way the same object can be the object of desire, thought, a hope, and so on. A difference in intentional content refers to the way the same object could be presented to the mind in different ways, even when the mode is the same. A bottle of champagne could also be thought of as a famous sparkling wine from France. Crane believes that all mental facts are fixed by all intentional facts. Thus, all intentional facts about a state of mind contribute towards fixing the phenomenal character. This is a view he calls impure intentionalism. According to this perspective, the phenomenal character of an experience supervenes on its intentional nature. There cannot be two experiences which are identical in their intentional nature but different in their phenomenal character. It should be noted that this is a strengthening of the original claim in Brentano's thesis that all mental states are intentional. This is because someone could hold that all mental states are intentional, but nonetheless reject intentionalism if they were to hold that two experiences could be identical in their intentional nature, but differ in their non-intentional properties, sometimes called qualia.
Okay, now I have to stop and think here. Okay, so he's calling this supervenience claim impure intentionalism. Okay, the phenomenal supervenes on intentional. There cannot be two. It should be noted that this is a strengthening, this is what I want to think about, of the original claim that all mental states are intentional. Strengthening of that claim. Why? Because someone could hold that all mental states are intentional, but reject. Well, when you say reject intentionalism, do you mean reject impure intentionalism?
Yes.
Intentionalism.
Yes, the thesis that the nature of a conscious mental state is determined by its intentionality.
Okay. Well, now I'm a little confused because he says this is a view he calls impure intentionalism. So.
Oh, yeah.
So is it that he changes the terminology, or what's going on? Is determining the same for him as, I guess it is supervenience, is a determining relation. So what is it, intentionalism up here on the impure intentionalism down there?
He talks about two, I should have made this clearer, I think. He talks about two types of intentionalism, pure and impure. And he says that the pure, I'm trying to remember, the pure says that the intentional contents of a mental state is the same as the phenomenal. The intentional character is the same.
If that's to say the one exhausts the other.
Yes.
That's the productive claim.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you fine, and then there's the impure. But when you come down to say that this is a strengthening of Brentano's thesis, sorry, where was this?
It's at the bottom of the paragraph, I think.
Yeah. Because someone could hold that all mental states, but nevertheless reject intentionalism. Which one? Impure or pure? Weak or strong?
I would say both, but I guess I'm talking about impure. So I would say...
Is that right? So you're saying that either is stronger than Brentano's thesis? I thought you just wanted to say that...
No, I want...
Intentionalism is stronger. First of all, my first reaction is Brentano's thesis is strong enough, so I'm not sure what that means, so I'm trying to understand that. And second, which thesis is stronger? Any intentionalist thesis is stronger than Brentano's?
Yes. Because Brentano's thesis doesn't say that the phenomenal character has to supervene on the intentional character. So it's a stronger claim. It's a different claim.
Alright, let me just read your last sentence. Because someone could hold that all mental states are intentional. That would be Brentano. But reject intentionalism if they were to hold the two experiences. Well, certainly what you've written at the end of that paragraph is impure intentionalism. Okay? So I think at least at that point they could reject impure intentionalism because what they're rejecting is two experiences could be identical but differ in their non-intentional properties, and that would not be supervenience. Okay, that would be a denial of supervenience, so it would be a denial of impure intentionalism. Is it now? Sorry, this is quite complicated, but we'll stick with it. Is a denial of impure intentionalism also a denial of intentionalism? Now, does that mean? Because I think intentionalism is stronger than impure intentionalism. So how does that work? If it's stronger, does that mean that strong intentionalism is also stronger? Yeah. I guess that means that strong intentionalism is also stronger than Brentano's thesis. Yeah. Okay. So it does follow, but the sentence that you actually write there is a sentence that whose content refers to impure intentionalism.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have said impure?
Put that word in.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you could leave it there. You don't have to get into the more complicated. And so how does that work with strong intentionalism? But we've thought about it. Now let me think about this for a minute. When Brentano said that all mental states were intentional, he was also saying if something were a mental state, right? This is back to it would be a necessary condition for it to be a mental state. It's necessary that it be intentional. Yeah?
Yeah.
He's also saying it's sufficient. In other words, if it's intentional, it's sufficient for mentality. Is that right? Because you said it was both a necessary and sufficient claim.
Yes.
Actually, I remember him as saying, gets back to my original confusion. He said, all and only mental states, have intentionality. Is that the same? I don't know. I have to think about it because this is really confusing. Is that the same as intentionality is both necessary and sufficient for mentality?
I think so. Because
okay, it's hard.
Yeah, I'm thinking about. So I'm just trying to separate them for a sec. So the mentality is necessary for intentionality. Have I got it the wrong way around?
No, if it's necessary, then that's the all.
The all, yeah.
Okay. So it's that bit that I find okay. It's the other bit.
And only.
Only mental state. It's sufficient. Is that the same? Only mental state. So nothing else has it.
Mm.
In other words, if you find intentionality, that's sufficient for mentality. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, it just is confusing.
No, it's the same as necessary and sufficient. Because if all mental states have it, that means it's necessary. Take any mental state, it'll be intentional. Intentionality is necessary for mentality. Only mental states. If you find something that has intentionality, that will be sufficient.
Mm.
Now, is that right? Hold on. Is that the same thing? Is that the same thing? I'm not 100% sure. I have to think about this. Only. It's sufficient. So it's sufficient because to say it's sufficient rules out anything else being part of mentality. Or at least part of the very thing of what of mentality is. In other words, you don't need anything else. It's sufficient for mentality that you have intentionality.
Yes.
When he said all and only, what he wanted to say is it's a mark of the mental, and you're not going to find that mark anywhere else. And in particular, the physical world does not exhibit intentionality.
Mm.
Okay? The physical world does not. Is that the same as saying intentionality is sufficient for the mental? If you find intentionality, there you find the mental.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not sure. Because let's say why couldn't it also be sufficient for something else? That doesn't say it's only the mental that has intentionality.
Which way around are we saying this now? And now I'm getting. I said it intentionality.
There seems to be a relationship between all and necessary, but I don't see the relationship between only and sufficiency. Can we think of something that's a different example of sufficiency or an all and only claim?
Yes.
Okay, let's say all and only girls have blonde hair. Okay, it's false, but all and only girls have blonde hair, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So then you say having blonde hair is sufficient for being a girl? Is that right?
Yes, because only girls have blonde hair.
So it's sufficient to be a girl that you have blonde hair.
If you have blonde hair, you are a girl. If you have blonde hair, it's sufficient that you're a girl.
Let me think of something else. The conditions are sufficient. Okay, let's try justified true belief. Knowledge is justified true belief. That's meant to be, these conditions are both meant to be necessary and sufficient for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So you have justified true belief, you've got knowledge, that's sufficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have knowledge, you have justified true belief, sufficiency, necessity. So if you have intentionality, you have mentality, yeah, necessary and sufficient, all. But only. belief, then you have knowledge and nothing else. If you haven't, I think that the reason why I'm finding it difficult is because it's a single property, right? And I certainly can't imagine somebody saying intentionality is all you need for mentality. Maybe you need something, but when you say all you need, you mean, in effect, that's to make it mental. There could be other things that the mental has, other properties that it has, but it's sufficient for it to be mental. Okay. Right. And if anything else had it, it would be mental. So if we found it something that looked like it was a physical property, we'd be wrong. It wasn't a physical property, it would be a mental property. Because all and only mental states have intentionality. Okay. Are we alright with that?
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yeah.
It is the same. Good. Alright, that said, what I'm wondering is, if you think that the mental had qualia as well, in some or any form, then even if that was true, it wouldn't be a defining characteristic of mentality. You could have mentality without it. So it seems to me that what Brentano must be rejecting is Descartes or Nagel, who seem to be giving consciousness, the phenomenal qualities, the defining character of the mental. So even if the mental did have qualitative character, that wouldn't be what defined it, according to Brentano. What defines it is intentionality.
Yes.
Okay? So that's why, yes, so that's why I'm a little bit confused with what Crane's saying, because let's say you were somebody who believed that the defining character of even my pain was its intentional aspect, but it also had qualia. You could say that, but the qualia wouldn't be defining of it. That would be like saying it also was something I disliked. But the disliking of it wasn't the defining quality of it, because I might like pain, I might dislike pain. It's not it doesn't define what pain is.
Yeah, I guess. Well, he's saying that because surely he's saying that it doesn't define it because it's dependent on the intentionality.
Yeah, and it's the intentionality which does the defining of it. That's why it's. But now, is that why he's saying it's stronger? That's what I don't understand. It's strengthening his original claim.
Yeah.
Why is it strengthening it? It's strengthening it that all mental states. What is it strong? Is it strengthening it under the guise all and only mental states are intentional? That's what's throwing us. Did he mean that he's strengthening the all and only claim, or just the all claim?
Just the all. He says
that's
quite.
Okay, but Brentano would agree. But Brentano's thesis isn't all; it's an all and only claim. So it's already Brentano's claim is stronger. That's what's throwing me.
Yeah, it's quite. Well, that's interesting you say that, because quite at the beginning of that Crane article, he says that Brentano makes his claim that it's all and only, but we're not going to. This isn't actually relevant to what we're saying. We're just going to talk about the all. So he separates it in a way that maybe it shouldn't be.
Well, that's interesting. And then when he gets to the end, he says, so now we've strengthened Brentano. our thesis is stronger than Brentano's.
Mm.
Thesis is stronger. Okay, but maybe what he means is it's stronger, but not in the way that Brentano's thesis is stronger by adding a sufficiency or an only claim. It's stronger in a different way. Maybe that's what he's saying. Let me see. So he's saying it's stronger. Why? Because someone could hold that all mental states are intentional, yes, and still hold that two experiences could be identical in their intentional nature and differ in their phenomenal properties. Okay. Good. Okay, I think what's going on is that Crane isn't thinking about whether the qualia are defining features or not. Okay? He's simply saying, look, here are two qualities. Mental states have intentional qualities, characteristics, and they have qualitative ones. Yeah?
Yeah.
And the qualitative supervene on the intentional.
Yes.
Yeah? Brentano says they all have the intentional. Crane is adding to that with the impure thesis, and the intentional, and the phenomenal, and there is something phenomenal, and it supervenes on that intentional. So that's extra to what Brentano's saying.
Yes.
Okay? But where I was getting confused is, but Brentano's claim is when you add the only, making intentionality the defining characteristic.
Okay, yeah,
but
I see what you're saying.
When Crane adds the impure intentionalism, yeah, the phenomenal or the qualitative state is not defining. It just happens to be a characteristic it has, but it's not a defining characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
So in once it's weak, it's a different way of strengthening it, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking that he strengthened his thesis already, and this is a different because he's only talking about the all, not the all and only, and he's strengthening that in a different way than Brentano strengthens it with the only.
Okay, so Brentano strengthens with the only, whereas Crane strengthens with the addition of the phenomenal character
as being supervenient on
yeah.
intention. But don't forget, when I say they strengthen it in different ways, the way they strengthen it are, I'm not sure there's any relation between them. They're just different ways of strengthening them.
Yeah.
Yeah? I think. That's where it gets a little, I think, complicated enough for the moment for you. Okay? So are you with me?
Yeah.
That, good, that was really complicated. So basically, when he says it's a strengthening, he's adding qualitative characteristics. He's saying they supervene on the intentional. But what he's not saying anything about is what defines the mental here.
Yes.
Okay, and I think this is why I'm now thinking about my Crane. I think this is ultimately why Crane moves away from impure intentionalism. Ultimately, he wants something that he wants his intentionality to swallow up the phenomenal. He doesn't want the phenomenal to be there at all. Right? Because, and now we'll go back and talk about this, because the really hard problem by some people is taken to exist with the phenomenal, right? That's what we learned from Nagel. The intentional, while Brentano thought that was a hard problem, a lot of philosophers since Brentano have thought, oh, well, we're getting closer to solving that problem. Why? Well, look at computers, right? I mean, it looks like we can build machines that have something like, right? And of course people will say, yeah, but that doesn't have original intentionality. But it's so close that people think we're almost there. Whereas the phenomenal aspects, we haven't a clue.
Yeah.
So if you could somehow reduce the qualitative to the intentional, exhaust the qualitative in the intentional, then you'll have reduced a hard problem to an easier problem.
Yeah.
Or a hard problem to a not so hard problem. Which isn't to say easy, but easier. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think that Crane... So in a sense, Crane and Brentano have different agendas. Which is why sometimes it can get very hard to map one onto the other. Their agendas are so different. I think Crane's agenda is the reduction of the phenomenal. That's his interest in intentionality.
Okay.
Whereas Brentano is not interested in reduction at all. He's just interested in observing this phenomenon. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Good. All right. Shall we carry on?
Yes, I'm almost to the end.
Okay.
Some scholars hold that qualia are by definition non-intentional states, or raw feels, while others leave open the possibility that qualia can be understood in intentional terms.
Okay, and that's exactly right. This is now where we've got the right the thing that Crane is grappling with. Go on.
Thus, some qualia theorists may agree that all mental states are intentional, but stop short of the intentionalism described by Crane.
Because what they're saying is all mental states are also intentional, or right? Or the ones that are phenomenal are also intentional. Okay? But that still leaves two very, hard qualities to be accounted for. Okay, go on.
By holding that there are non-intentional properties which contribute to phenomenal character. These theorists therefore hold that two experiences could be identical in their intentional nature, but differ in their non-intentional properties. Such would be the case if one argued, like Bloch, that two visual experiences could represent the same objective colour property on account of sharing appropriate causal linkages to the physical environment, even though subjectively the experience of colour differed. There was a difference in mental paint, in virtue of some internally contrived inversion of what it was like for one to experience colour on two occasions. This view, then, is a kind of non-reductive intentionalism, as it allows for there to be differences in the character of mental states, while the intentional nature of the state remains the same.
Okay, so hold on. This is a rejection of supervenience, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? And a rejection of supervenience is... Yeah. All right, let's go on. Good.
Therefore, there exists a wide range of positions regarding whether Brentano was right to say that all mental states are intentional, ranging from the view of separatists that there can be mental states with purely phenomenological aspects, to those intentionalists who claim intentionality exhausts the character of mental states. It seems that the most plausible of these accounts is non-reductive intentionalism, which holds that all mental states are intentional, but that they also have phenomenal characters which are not defined by the intentional nature of the state. In this way, it can be said that Brentano's claim that all mental states are intentional is not wrong. However, it does not take into account the non-intentional properties, qualia, which accompany but are not defined by their intentionality.
Okay. Good. That last sentence. Brentano's claim that all mental states are intentional is not wrong. But then you say, but it doesn't take into account the non-intentional properties which accompany but are not determined by? Do you mean determined or defined by?
Let me read it again. Yeah, I mean determined.
Okay, so let's say Brentano... Okay, in terms of what I said earlier, I think what I'd say is Brentano didn't take them into account because he was only interested in the defining qualities.
Yeah. Now you've talked about that and the difference of the different intentions of Brentano and Crane. That makes sense, and I probably wouldn't write it quite like that.
Well, you're almost there. I mean, as I said, this is hard.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to do it because I wanted you to think about the relationship between intentionality, and I think the main way this usually gets discussed for your exams will be intentionalism, the Crane thesis. Okay? So if you understand how that works, that's going to be sufficient. And the different varieties of intentionalism, the weak and the strong. Okay? But I think it is interesting that, yes, Brentano may not have taken into account qualia, but that's because he was interested in finding out what it was that defined the mental and made it different from the physical. Now, you might say, but no physical thing has qualia. And if you say that, then you're saying, so now mentality has two things, right? And they're both essential, right? But he's saying, no, it's only the intentional which is essential. So that's another thing, right? He's saying something very different from Descartes.
Yeah. I mean, to me it seems that you can't say that the intentional... It just seems strange to talk about the intentional and not the phenomenal, unless you're claiming that the phenomenal isn't, defining. Am I using that word wrong again?
Good.
So by not including it at all, it just...
By not including it, it looks like he must be saying something like pains are intentional. Must be doing what Crane's trying to do. Show how pains can be intentional. Because any allowance that he has for qualia, either he's going to have to say that's not the defining characteristic, it's only one of the defining characteristics. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say it's one of them. He says it's the defining characteristic. So in order for it to be the case, I guess he must have something. He must have to be developed along Crane's lines, and maybe that's what Crane's doing. Yeah. Good. But now I know you have to go in a minute. So separatism basically separates the two. But there's another question here. If you separate the two, which one is the defining one? That's come up here. Or can you have them both there and only one of them be the defining one? That's also odd. Because that would be like saying, so the mental states could have qualia and so could something else, but nothing else has qualia either. So it looks like they're both defining. And what we're trying to figure out is the relation between them. But the other thing that you didn't touch on, which is the Montague and Bain, which is just like Crane takes Brentano and tries to show that all mental states, are intentional. Someone like Bain and Montague are going to want to say, no, even the intentional has an intrinsic phenomenal quality. So they're going to say there's something it's like to have a belief, and that's not just a belief plus a phenomenal. It's not, right? That's what cognitive phenomenology amounts to. It amounts to something like there is something it's like to have the belief. So they want the phenomenology to really swallow up the intentionality.
Yeah.
Arguably. They want that to be the defining quality.
Yeah, so on one side you've got the phenomenology trying to swallow up the intentionality, and on the other side you've got the intentionality trying to swallow up the phenomenology.
Good.
I guess because it is really hard to try and account for them both being not explaining one in terms of the other. But that's kind of what I've argued in what I've said is most plausible, is the idea that there's both of them and one's not more important than the other.
But then we have to modify Brentano's goal, which to find the defining characteristic of the mental. Okay? So really, really good. And I think that you have now deepened your understanding of Brentano by doing the crane. And when I add the cognitive phenomenology, that will be a different essay.
Okay.
But I just wanted you to see where it fit in the landscape.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Good. So you have to go. Next week, you already have the reading list. Okay? And in the next day or two, I'll be sending out a few more reading lists so you can start to look and check that you can get all the literature, okay?
For next week, I think I've already looked up and it's pretty much all online, which is good.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Another good week's work.
Thank you very much. See you next week. Enjoy the opera next week. Oh no, I'll see you before. Bye.
The opera. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay, bye.